Welcome back to Loki Legends, where today we're diving into the crown jewel of Season 2, 4 game-changing lessons that transformed how our 4 guests approach design and branding. First, Christian Helms of Helms Workshop reveals his blueprint for creating an unfair business advantage through strategic branding. This episode is pure gold, no filler, all substance. So grab something to write with because these insights might just revolutionize your creative practice. So let's dive in. This is a big thing on the Helms website, creating an unfair advantage and making a dent in the universe. So I wanted to touch on that because we've talked about like the creativity side of it, what like branding is, but I think that there's the whole business side of it and how it connects to branding. And that's kind of like the secrets that maybe you have to unveil over a long career to try and make that impact. And how do you make like a monetary contribution to the client, which I think we're all trying to do with our work, but maybe we don't see the metrics so clearly. But let's just go through some quick numbers here that you sent over to me so that I didn't have to do the hard homework. But the Tecovas rebrand tripled revenue to 30 million. You guys rebranded Southern Comfort for a 544 million sale by Brown-Forman to Sazerac, if I'm saying that correctly. And then Rhinegeist Brewery is consistently listed as one of the fastest growing breweries. So, yeah. I mean, that's huge. This is all a long-winded way of saying, like, how do we create that unfair advantage for our clients, whether it's through physical products or branding or digital, and make a unique dent in the universe?
In building a brand, in the work that we do, it can get really squishy really quickly, where it's hard for a client to understand the return on their investment. Mm-hmm. And I very much want the client to see tangible results on the investment. We were in a conversation earlier today where I was walking a client through this. With transparency and very specific goals, you could do that. So that's kind of the academic side of it. The other side is that branding represents an unfair advantage in the marketplace because most people don't think about branding the way you and I think about branding. Like, we are way too inside baseball. The average person experiences brands and loves them or hates them or is indifferent to them. And they don't spend a moment contemplating that. It's the opposite of that academic exercise we talked about earlier. But if you dig deep and create an experience for folks that takes them out of their everyday, that transports them, one of the exercises we do in strategy with brands is where will the brand transport someone to? What will it invite them to do? What will it inspire them to do? We kind of have this metric that we do. If you can nail that stuff, you can create an absolute unfair advantage in the marketplace. I mean, statistics are transparent that if there are 2 comparable products on the shelf, people will buy the one that they have more affinity for. They'll buy the one that they like more, despite price, unless it's just astronomical. And that's a whole strategy in itself, where sometimes putting the price up here actually makes it more valuable. But people will buy the one that they want to be associated with more. And we can create that. A statistic we don't put out there a whole lot that I've always just really loved is we built a sparkling water brand years ago. And one of the things that I was proudest of, the brand was really bombastic and dynamic, and we had influence on the flavors. So there was, instead of just like lime, lemon, cherry, it was like habanero, mango, jalapeno, serrano, pickle flavor. Like the flavors were crazy. And then there was just a plain water version. And the plain water version outsold all of the generic and in-store brands at like 1.5 or 2x the price. It's water and air in a can. Like, it's water and carbon dioxide in a can. There is no difference between everything on the shelf. Ours was made in the same place that the in-store brand was made, and it outsold them like crazy only because of brand. Like it's the cleanest example I have that you can leverage brand to influence customer decision, and it's all because it was cooler and more exciting. And if I'm going to drink a plain sparkling water, I'm going to drink it from the folks who make the crazy pickle flavor.
It's like you had said, that affinity towards something is driving the purchasing decision, which I think is something that we experience. Like if you're at a bodega, you can definitely get overwhelmed by the amount of choices, but you're going to grab the thing that's either you're familiar with, that you had as a kid, or the one that is kind of the coolest, that wouldn't embarrass you walking out of the store with. So
Totally. We're doing a big rebrand, and it's for a brewery. And one of the questions that we posed really as a team is with their team is, what does it say right now when you walk into a party with a 6-pack of X? And what do we want it to say about you when you walk into a party with a 6-pack of X? That's huge.
it's an interesting thought exercise of how does this item in the world represent me? Would I share this with a friend? And is it embarrassing? Is it cool? And kind of your kind of pocket of reality and culture, and how that's all received. And I find that it's refreshing in a way that that we can have a job where we can think about that stuff, make decisions, and make cool work and get paid. It's kind of a astonishing thing if you think about it.
You build up a tolerance, you build up a thick skin, you build up all this stuff. But I think it's really important to remind ourselves every so often, like, we get to do this for a living. Like we make stuff in a very simple way. We make stuff for a living, that people get to experience and enjoy, and that goes out into the world and creates all these interactions and moments that we can't even imagine. It's huge.
Hmm.
It's a big deal. I try to remind myself at the beginning of every project, like, this is the opportunity to do that. And you can't ever take that for granted.
Hmm.
Um, you've got to treat every opportunity not just as an opportunity to do great work for yourself, but to do something meaningful for your client partner. Um, there are easier ways to make money than what we do, for sure. Like,
Yeah.
it is, but it's such a joy to do, and it if we do it right, it brings value. Um, I have a friend who's a scientist, and I had a beer with him months ago, and he said, "Man, I don't know how you do what you do, because every day you have to reinvent the wheel." And my response was, "Yeah, but every day we get to reinvent the wheel.
Hmm.
It's great. It's
Yeah.
great."
That's such an interesting thing to hear, because that would be someone's worst nightmare and then someone's like biggest joy.
Totally.
So two people can be at the opposite ends of the spectrum, and it just comes down to the individual. So it may be a good point to reflect on if there's any tension inside of the the audience listening. Like, where is that coming from? Is it just that you just need a break, or do you need to reassess the type of people that you're working with? Or is there a tension within you that you're not enjoying this, or are you really enjoying this process and you just want to do more? I'm assuming more in the camp of that, because they're listening to this podcast trying to glean insights or a perspective, or maybe just be validated that they're not crazy, which is a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis.
I have worked really shitty jobs with great people, and I've worked really great jobs with shitty people, and the former has always been better. You
Mm-hmm.
can work a shitty job with amazing people, and it's a joy to go to work every day and to do what you do. You can have what is on paper an amazing job, and if the people are terrible, it's not an experience you want to have. We literally have on our website, one of our non-negotiables is we don't work with assholes, and that includes us, right? It's Life is too short to work with folks who are toxic or disrespectful or whatever. And when we put that on the website a while back, there was some concern that it was a little too brash, but it is proven to be nothing but a fantastic filtering tool where folks get a huge kick out of it and want to work with us. And whoever saw it and doesn't want to work with us probably knows who they are and made the decision appropriately, is all I can figure.
A lot of what we've been talking about is making the bold decision. And I think there's an inherent value in making those brave, bold decisions, whether it's that copywriting on the website or doing the weird idea and just putting it out there, even if it bombs. And that could be just a general theme from this conversation is having the courage to do that bold choice and see where it leads, and then knowing that you can always pivot or change to get to a better or more perfect designed end destination.
All I can say is I agree. I think you summed that up so beautifully. I can't add to it. That's perfect.
On your website, kind of in that same sort of area of the we don't work with assholes, this idea of branding is bonding, and
Yeah.
how can branding be used to foster a natural and lasting relationship with your customers that feels effortless? And I think there's two parts of that it's the fostering relationship and the feeling effortless. So those are maybe two different parts if you can dive into either one of those.
Yeah, it kind of ties back to the humanity piece I was talking about earlier. Something that we really focus on and talk about a lot is talking to people like they're people. Um, it's easy to get caught up in demographics and KPIs and all those things, and they're important. But funny enough, as everything kind of scales up and evolves and gets more digital and more targeted, just speaking like a person to another person is really valuable. I mean, I think we've seen that in a parallel field in how user generated content has become so important through social media advertising, where an ad doesn't have the punch that just someone speaking as a person has. And so it's something that we do very much with brands as well, where um, where we want to meet people where they are and talk to them in a way that feels real and human and really reflects the humanity of the founder or the team or the spirit behind the brand. That's a biggie. And then branding is bonding is just the idea that it should be an ongoing conversation. It shouldn't be us talking at you. It should be a back and forth, and there should be a shared kinship there. And ideally you're building community and you are building a sustained conversation with the people who are interested in your brand. What we do is so simple and so complex at the same time, but you can cut through the clutter by being human.
Especially in a ever growing digital AI age. I think that it is important to hear.
And then tagging back to what you said about being natural and effortless. If we do our work the right way, it should appear effortless. It should appear obvious and like it just fell down from heaven and landed perfectly formed in front of you. It shouldn't feel strategized. It shouldn't feel like it has KPIs behind it. It should just feel effortless.
Whew. That first lesson was real meaty, something to chew on like a big beef bone from an Austin rib barbecue shack. But now let's unpack how the team at Studio 28K uses storytelling as an engine behind every successful project they touch. Let's get into it. How do you see storytelling and its use case in design, especially web design? We can bring it to that maybe more specifically. But how do you guys fundamentally use storytelling, and how does it tie into your process?
If there's not a story, idea or a story, then we're like, something's missing. How do we find it? How can we massage it more? How can we find it? But one of the ways I think it shows up a lot is in the way we work, because yes, upfront in the strategy and laying the foundation, we work with our clients on a simple question saying, what's this a story about? And they often don't have the answer, but then we may come back and say, we think this is a story about X. it's a story about creators finding something, right? Or it's a story about, but that's something we then weave in there and see if it resonates, and then that story idea is often also connected to a visual idea of how do you tell that story visually. Well, that could be something about, I don't know, layering, and it's this, and it's connected to the story about something. In our own branding, it's obviously a story about time, which it's very on the nose. There's the sand, there's time running out, there's even a clock in there. But it's telling a story about time, and so we try to find that story when we work with our clients. So that's in one aspect, very upfront. Then you said in terms of web design, obviously it depends on what you're building or what the needs are, but we work a lot like storytellers in that we storyboard. We say, okay, the way you experience any digital experience is sequential, right? It is a sequence of events, whether I'm trying to book a car or I'm just going through a site. Like, it's always a sequence while I'm scrolling down or going through layers. And that's what a story is. It's a sequence of events where you then add a problem and some drama and things like that. So in itself, interactive design is always already sequential. So it's quite easy to tap into that and say, well, while achieving these goals across these steps, how can we weave in a narrative in between it, or as part of it? And we do that a lot with storyboarding. So we'll sit there and do an experience from A to B, really, and then say, okay, it starts over here. When I then do this, this is gonna happen. And in that transition, we are gonna do this thing, which is gonna symbolize something like this, and that's gonna take me over here. And now the story continues, and so on and so on. And that, I mean, that's a technique we've completely just stolen from animators and movies and storytelling, to say, like, well, if we want storytelling in our work, we should just work like storytellers do.
And I would say from like a client perspective, it works really well as well. Like, they understand way better the experience that we are visioning for them. It's they're never really sitting with lots of questions, because we are not allowing anything to be up for doubt, because we think about those in between frames, right? You have to think about that when you work within just the viewport always, instead of creating long artboards that is more like an editorial approach. So I feel like when convincing someone on design, then it's easier for them to understand it that way.
It's also something that maybe like it's fundamental in our core, that like even our ancestors, this is always something that has been timeless. And
Yeah.
Maybe that's another aspect of this episode, is kind of like focusing on like the essentials and the things that never change. So storytelling has always been important, whether you're, you know, in a tribe around a fire as a source of entertainment, or communicating a value system or religion, or narratives for growing as a person. But it also translates to marketing and business and communicating to an audience, or even a client in this case. So it does seem like something that will always be important and is essential to our mission as creative individuals who communicate ideas for a living. So I guess like that's fundamental. But the other part of that maybe is like, in a world that is so overloaded with just new brands, content, this algorithmic model where things are so flashy and snappy, is there stories that rise to the top? And how can we as creative professionals maybe create stories that maybe slow people down, or maybe in some cases you need to speed people up if the content is, or the brand is dependent on that? But I guess really the question in there is how to create something that is maybe engaging and gets people to actually pay attention in this world that is completely overloaded with messaging and brands and products.
It's a
That's the
difficult
million
task,
dollar
right?
question, right? Like,
I'm selfishly asking because I'm like, I want to know the secret if they have it.
I feel like if we can crack this one between the three of us, we will get very rich very soon.
Yes, exactly. Let's make a course and sell it, and then boom,
Exactly.
millionaires overnight.
I saw on Instagram recently someone from a similar background like ours doing a reel and saying that storytelling for brands was not necessary anymore. Now it was more just about setting a vibe because everything was so short all the time. And I thought that was an interesting point and say, like, yeah, I can see what you mean by that. I would then challenge that and say, no, it's not enough with just a vibe, because that vibe is also a story you're trying to tell. You're just not able to articulate it, so you call it a vibe. But I think you can still tell stories. You just have to tell them in much smaller chunks at a time. So instead of getting the benefit of a nice couple of minutes or something, you're just getting little snippets. But you can still, whether it's telling the story of living an urban life or whatever it is, I think that's still possible. And there are so many great short films and examples of storytelling that don't even say anything. It's just emotion and seeing that emotion and then stitching it together. So I think it's still possible. But it's obviously
Up,
challenging.
right?
Oh yeah,
Up
the
by
first
Pixar.
couple of minutes.
The first 5 minutes, right? It's a few minutes and it just hits that nerve, and it's incredible that you can, in such a short amount of time, without having really established any characters, you can create such a deep connection to a viewer. You know, that's really hard to get to that point. But I mean, there's many elements you can play with, right? And I think in general, I guess it's all about standing out in a way, right? There's constant trends that forces us to do everything the same. So I think it's also like sometimes get out of and have a little bit of an overview of what's happening and say, what could we do different with this media or this particular period in time to grab that attention. I mean, there's many tricks in storytelling, right? That gets us hooked back in, like an element of surprise or whatever it is that snaps us back into the chair.
Yeah, and that's probably like a good thought, is like to pay attention to media, maybe like in this case like storytelling, and like what are the aspects that we find in like a book that's really captivating. Like, is it that there's a semblance of, there's like a pace that's slow in a book and then gets really intense and then like comes back down after like this really climactic moment. Or even in music, I think there's like a Jay-Z quote that every song can't be a banger on your album. I'm probably like butchering it, but you can't have every song be like the single, the radio single. You got to have a flow in a story, even in that, in multiple mediums. And so in the case of like visual design, what are those elements, whether it's a shift in typography, scaling, color shift, like how can we create captivating moments that stand out even on something that scrolls or in a transition? And that is for everyone to determine what is appropriate for their project. But maybe don't look at websites for the core fundamental thing to teach you about what you need to do for your project. Maybe you can look at other mediums, even if it's written, and kind of take from those examples to incorporate in the flow of what you're designing.
And I think if you do, the work becomes more interesting because you're cross-pollinating instead of just like echo chambering the same over the same.
We also talk a lot about mechanisms, Stefan and I, like how certain things are working, right? One thing is to scroll up and down a page, but we navigate the world in so many different ways than just that. And I think the web should be a place where we can do more things than just scrolling vertically, just because some UX person says that that's best practice. We also drive and we ride bikes and we ride scooters and we walk and we run in the real world. So we should also be able to do multiple things in the digital space.
In this lesson, Simon Dixon takes us a bit deeper, exploring how creativity isn't just a skill, but the fundamental fuel of humanity itself. Want to learn more? Lean in and listen. I guess my goal of our conversation today, which is really to dive into maybe some of the fundamentals of creativity and to why we create, and really center our conversation around that. I think that's maybe one of the topics that doesn't get discussed as much as it could, is really kind of the baseline. Why create? Why do we even do this in the first place? And maybe does it all matter at the end of the day? But
excellent way to crush someone's spirit off the bat. Everything you do is entirely pointless. I think let's get to existential early. It's good.
But maybe just to kick it off, maybe not so existential, but maybe a little philosophical in nature. But why does creativity matter to our species? I mean, our ancestors dating back to prehistory were creating and writing on walls and creating bits of art. And I'm curious, what does creativity mean to you personally, but also as the human race in general? And that could apply to many different worlds. And I'm curious, how does it help us, creativity, how does it help us connect to one another, and also hopefully create a world that is more empathetic, equitable, and optimistic?
When you think about the creativity that we do, it's applied creativity to problem solving. So we're in the area of communications. So we create design and identity systems and communication systems which help people connect to information, brands, ideas, systems, services, products that they want in their lives or are part of their lifestyle. So that's applied graphic design, applied thinking to communications. When you think about creativity in terms of the human condition, it's basically the fabric of who we are. So if you go back, like you were saying, back to prehistoric times, it's not just creativity, it's discovery. And some of that is driven by problem solving, which initially is survival, then it's communications, then it's experience, then it reaches out. So obviously when you go from not being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger to living in the Renaissance, you have a wider range of ways that you can express yourself. But I think creativity is really the fuel and the spark of humanity. It's the thing that we use to navigate the world, make decisions and create the things around us, both good and bad, that determine where we are in that journey. And if you think about how creativity, applied creativity, invention, discovery has affected us as a species, it's been radical. Our ascension has been profound. And again, both good and bad. There's obviously, overpopulation, the environment, people cramped together, creating wars and difference and things like that. But the reverse of that is we've managed to navigate and create a world where we can all exist in a very positive and optimistic way if we look at the world that way.
And another thing that I found interesting over the course of doing this job for 10 plus years is that how creativity and culture kind of coexist or kind of co-create each other as we push out new ideas and innovations, and times change and people become accustomed to new things, technologies, etc. It does seem to shift and evolve together. And I feel like us as people in the creative industry, in design and branding, do impact that in some way. So maybe the question is does creativity collide with branding, and do we help to co-create culture and the identity and the track of culture in modern times?
It's not separate things, I don't think, because creativity is in everything. It's in all walks of life. So there's often a preconception that certain people are more creative than others. Obviously, some are more skilled and practiced, but we're all making culture live together, and we're all being influenced by culture live together. And it's how you edit those cultural references and the things you take on board through your own personal life and lived experience, then reflect them back out, that creates the communities, societies, tribes, and ways of creating, communicating that we all share. So I don't think there's a line between them. I think it's an overlapped system where what you hear, what you see, what you feel, what you smell, what you touch, where you're on your life journey, where you are on the planet, the things you experience, they well up in your mind. And when you draw down on that, consciously or subconsciously, you create something. So inherently, you're part of it. And if you're at the edge of where, say, technology meets the world and things like that, you might be making a difference, but I think we're actually all doing it together.
What I like that you said is that we're all doing it together, no matter your job or status in society. Not that that matters in this case, but that we all are an essential piece of driving that culture forward to a better and more optimistic future.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, there's always bad creativity. There's always mediocre creativity. There's always good, then great, and there's always exceptional. It's a kind of pyramid. So, if you're given any particular type of design or branding, in the case we're talking about, of course, your talent kind of dictates where you sit in that firmament, how much effort you put into it, how much it drives you, how much you drive it. All of those things are really important. I think one of the things about creating for a living is that there's a kind of personal fulfillment from creating, like both professionally and non-professionally, that is hardwired into who you are as a person. And I like that part of it. I like creating the space for others to create as my kind of raison d'etre in life. I enjoy that. And I like that the work that we create meets the real world and has to interact with the real world. It's not just something that is rarefied and specific to this room that I'm in. It goes out to Mexico City and Japan and to Boston. It reaches out to the world, and then you see whether or not it's helpful and useful and it works, and you learn from that and you get better. So I like the kind of democratization of design and creativity, kind of like a regular level for people, and trying to lift things up from that.
What was the spark that drove you to creativity, and what drives you to create even today?
It's about the feeling of making, I think. So when I started out, when I was younger, I used to do lots of different things. So I used to paint, I used to draw, I used to make comic books. And I was much more of, I think, a visual person. I learned a lot by doing rather than, I'm not particularly academic person, let's say. So I learned by doing, and I learned by expressing myself to a certain degree. And, that's maybe what drew me into the kind of creative output. And I went to a not very good provincial art college, but while I was doing that, I was looking at album covers. Actually, that was the thing that interested me. It was like, does these in those days it was vinyl, so it's 12 inches, which is a nice format. It's a big format. You can roll a joint on it. You can hold it up. You can read the sleeve notes. It's a very it's like a tactile thing. And I was looking at these, and they were pieces of art, but there were also something that lived in someone's living room, something that people handled a lot, something that was important to them because it defined a bit of who they are. And it's like a real thing. So I started to think about what that was. And then there was people's names on the back of them that had designed these things. So I like the idea of the manufacturing. I got into it wanting to make amazing design. That's all I wanted to do. And I like typefaces and layout and negative space and grids and messing things up. And I just used to spend thousands of hours making things because I got great joy from it. And I didn't think about money or systems or scale or fame or rewards or any of that. It was just making, and I just absolutely loved designing things. So that's why I did it.
To round it all out, Bryan James challenges us to embrace personal taste and positivity as a weapon against the growing sameness of the digital landscape.
I think this is all very connected to something that I think about quite a lot, and it's the relevance of taste and maintaining your taste. And I think about this quite a lot, and have tried in some moments to make sure I'm steering that to an extent. So when you see work, and I'm really not targeting, I'm not trying to at all target like award sites. I think they do a fucking amazing job for what we do, honestly. And they're just one element of this. But it could be, the bigger awards where there's a fancy show, etc. Right? Also, just features online where you see certain kinds of projects doing well, and that can also be that then businesses think, that's good. Like that's perceived as good, so I think that's good. And then it's very easy to get into the trap of seeing that that's good, and then twisting what you're doing to be like that because you've seen that being successful. But I really think it's extremely important to maintain a taste. And if you maintain your taste and that's what steers the project, then in a way, I feel like when you bring yourself into the project, I know obviously you have to do what's best for the client, create the project that's going to do well for them. But I still think, and this could be controversial to some people, that I like to try to bring myself into the project somewhat. That's the way I feel like is the key to trying to make something quite unique, but also that has the consequence of, I would say, possibly less chance of being featured on these websites because your taste is specific. Your taste shouldn't be based on what you see around and is doing extremely well.
I would agree with that. And it's something that I think about a lot as well. And the pieces, the aspects of it that I tend to focus on is the fact that a company is hiring, let's say, an agency or an individual, a freelancer, whatever kind of person that they're hiring them because they have a perspective and they do have a level of taste. And yes, that taste can, let's say, flux for what is best for the particular project, but your individual taste shouldn't be influenced or prioritized by, let's say, a trendy pocket of culture or subculture. It should be in the service of either the client or because it's a perspective they're hiring you to have. So a very specific opinion or a way of seeing or being. I mean, I think about other examples like you go to a specific restaurant, let's say maybe a Michelin star restaurant, because you're really excited about that chef and what they're going to cook you, or you're really excited about a musician because you resonate with their work and they have a particular vision of what they want to say and the music that they produce. And sometimes that shifts and changes as they grow as a person. And I think that's where like taste and style can elevate, evolve, and shift over the course of time. But the thing is, it's like your specific lens, it has like an opinion behind it, and you're making decisions because it connects to you, but there may also be strategy involved.
Just on the last point you made there, I think that being driven by taste also makes those decisions quite easy. You don't second guess things as much if you're basing everything on instincts. By the way, I just want to mention one thing. When I say taste, just for anybody thinking like, oh, he's saying he has good taste or something, I mean a taste. A taste can be terrible, but it's a taste. It's because it's someone's opinion whether that's terrible or not, or good or not. Like a taste can be so fucking whack, but that is incredibly unique. And yeah, I mean, in the example you mentioned with the musicians, quite often the bands who everyone remembers are like, oh yeah, it's their sound, and then they influence loads of people or loads of bands. And then if there's a band where you can see, oh yeah, you can map out their influences quite easily, they haven't got this like rich uniqueness somehow.
It's interesting because there's like collective taste, and that's where we kind of get pockets of music.
Bang on, yeah.
Yeah. So like 80s had a particular sound. So there's pockets of taste, but then there's loads of different bands that are doing different things. I think we had even talked offline one time about like David Bowie and his influence and his personal taste and how it shifted and changed.
That was an amazing example because he basically had different stages, completely evolved, and evolving the taste. But yeah, this like the community taste, it's so easy to get wrapped up into that. And that's the thing. I think to an extent you do have to. Obviously, you have to keep up with like modern visual appeal. If you were designing something with the same visual taste that you had in the 90s, I didn't have any visual taste in the 90s, by the way. I was up to 14 years old, but I just mean as an example. Then it wouldn't work. A website 800 pixels wide, or maybe even 600 pixels wide or something. So yeah, it does have to evolve, but but still have this kind of key thread through it. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, actually. The how you have to evolve your taste, and I think it's something that you kind of have to have an eye on. You know, most of the time in the work we create, you feel the evolution of what you're doing visually, or not just visually, but like maybe the technical adventurousness of the work that you're doing, or just evolving some parts. But I think that the taste part's kind of like in the background. It's not as visible, and for that reason, I think it needs quite a bit of concentration, or you need to keep an eye on it.
So if I were to be so bold as to try to get to the root of what the bri taste is, and like what is kind of
I was about to ask the same thing there.
no way. Okay, then we can go tit for tat, back and forth. But I would say that your kind of taste involves a boldness of bright colors, a love of the animated and the micro interactions. I think that your work has a playfulness to it and almost like an optimistic point of view shown through design. And I think that that's a very clear, I guess, like through line of a lot of your work. Even the sites that you have that are kind of like, maybe let's say like darker in terms of like the primary color is black. Or I think back to like the Train Robber VR, like they all have like this interesting dynamic element that it has like a uniqueness to it. There's the animations that kind of play into the general dynamic of the website and it being like playful and fun and just like a joy to use. So am I hitting the nail on the head of like what kind of makes like a Bryan project?
Yeah, it's funny that you pick this element up, because firstly, I don't know why, but like the fun, bold, bright colors is just something that's there. It's always been there. From the beginning when I was at university, that's what appeals to me. And also, I think that design and creativity is an extremely positive thing. Like, I think it brings something quite bright into the world. And I think that even when you have a project which needs like a more sinister or darker tone, I think you can only apply that by having bright moments, or like a positive part to balance it out. If you and this is like a marketing thing for many years, I would say, like the companies like WWFs of this world, not the wrestling company, of course. They need to, when they market something and they're trying to hit somebody's heart regarding a very important issue with animal conservation, etc. You can't just go all in with something very depressing. You need something positive to balance it out. Otherwise, nobody listens, because, I mean, why would you? I don't want to just feel depressed at this thing that you're throwing at me right now, which is all advertising. So I think that that's the first element, that I think that you always need to have a positive, also just a positive outlook generally. I think that in what we do, we get to bring something into the world. It's exciting. It's amazing to be able to do that. And why would you not feel positive about it? And when you create something that you like, whether it be a visual thing or something animated, the feeling is great. The feeling's amazing. So I feel like maybe that's a part of where that comes from, that I feel positive about creating. And I think that I do not in any way want to talk like in any way negative about some projects out there, because there's all sorts of different styles that you like. But I myself, in my own work, anytime there's been a project where it's rather like needs to be dark, I kind of like feels like going against things. And I would say it's interesting that you picked that out, because I would say an interesting thing about your work is that you have that element, but quite often you will have like a dark background palette, but it's very bright. And I think that's actually more difficult to achieve, to be honest. You know, that it feels bright and positive, even though sometimes you'll have like black background color palette. Everything pops. Does that make sense? Oh, my wayward there. As I was going to ask you the same.
I think I like in design like really, really high contrast And I think that's like the benefit of like a darker background, enabling the foreground to really like shine. So sometimes I think about it in like almost like a theatrical sense, where like if you're in a theater it's completely dark, whether you're at the cinema or like a live performance, but then the foreground is illuminated and that's what you're seeing. It's funny looking at your work, I'm like, I love the bold colors, and then when I try it myself, like sometimes it feels like perfectly right if we're doing a project, and then sometimes I'm like, I think we should make everything black.
Yeah, nice. I was going to ask, do you feel that that bleeds into, not so take it away from anything design related, but we're visual people, so you look at other kinds of artistic work, could be art itself, but all sorts of things. You mentioned theatre there. Do you think that bleeds into your taste of other things? This visual contrast desire.
I think so. I think it resonates in maybe just like a mentality in me in general, where I like those types of ideas or visuals or music that is kind of like brushing up against or has like that high contrast. So like I think that's like the cool thing about like jazz in a lot of ways, or like hip hop in a lot of ways. It kind of like can play in like this very like contrasting world. So in jazz you have like the tension of like the notes that sound like quote unquote wrong, but it's like the dissonance to make the other notes sound right. So you may get a sound that feels alarming or jarring, but then it resolves nicely. And I think like that is like a beautiful concept in design or art. I think that hip hop, another example where you can fuse whatever genres you want together. So taking samples, taking pieces of other music and culture and fusing it together to create a new sound, like the Beastie Boys introducing like punk into hip hop, produced by three Jewish boys in New York, is a very different sound than like the sounds of the Bronx or Harlem. Using disco tracks and then slicing up the drum beats. So I think like from that, a lot of my references are based on music, just because that was like a huge part of my life, still is. And I think that it does a good job of communicating things that I can't like explain visually. I can explain through genre references.
I feel like it's a really interesting thing to link something you like in other other art forms completely away from design and bring them in somehow, like you mentioned there. Because I think that if you do something like that, I feel like it can have an impact on your self-confidence as a designer. Because I think the unfortunate thing about what we do is the skills tend to be a little bit soft because everything changes so fast. Like you can learn a piece of software, or you can learn how to do this kind of design or this kind of design. That kind of design or that tool will then die. Like it fades away. It fades away. And then you need to learn. And I think that can have quite an impact on making you feel like all the things you know are kind of like this fluffy, movable thing that can mean nothing. And do I know anything? But then if you take something from like elsewhere like that and apply it into what you're doing, that's not expirable. Like that doesn't expire. That also has an impact in the taste side, by the way, because you're automatically making something more unique because the influences are coming from far elsewhere rather than directly in the region of work you're doing yourself. My entire point there is I think that like self-confidence for us as designers is quite important, and it's very vulnerable. I think many people in what we do would agree with that, that we're quite susceptible to imposter syndrome. But if you have some anchors like this, oh yeah, this is how I do this, rather than, okay, I know this style and now I can do that and then I'm not going to do that anymore for the rest of my life. If you got this like, yeah, you've got this anchored thing, I think that can make you feel a bit more comfortable that you do know quite a lot and that you do have skills that are valuable and won't necessarily expire to things like AI, which is especially relevant now, I would say.
So if you like this episode, make sure to check out all 4 of the episodes with each of our guests. They're all linked in the description below. And while you're down there, you can subscribe so you can continue your design education without missing an episode. But that's all for me, and I'll see you in the next one.